China and EU schedule crunch talks to resolve economic deadlock. China and the European Union have agreed to hold a new round of trade talks to pave the way for a high-level leaders' summit next month, but analysts said it remained to be seen whether the two sides could resolve the impasse in their bilateral economic relations. The talks were announced by the European Commission following a meeting between China's Commerce Minister, Wang Wentao, and EU Trade Chief, Maros Sefcovic, on the sidelines of a World Trade Organization event in Paris on Tuesday. They are expected to lay the groundwork for a high-level summit slated for late July in Beijing, where European leaders will meet with President Xi Jinping. Do you have questions about the biggest topics and trends from around the world? Get the answers with SCMP Knowledge, our new platform of curated content with explainers, FAQs, analyses, and infographics brought to you by our award-winning team. The two sides held focused, candid, and in-depth discussions on pressing and important issues related to China-EU economic and trade cooperation, China's Ministry of Commerce said in a statement on Wednesday. They also tasked their respective working teams to intensify efforts in preparing for this year's key bilateral agenda on the economic and trade front, it added. Meanwhile, an EU spokesperson said on Tuesday that the bloc's overall objective remains to rebalance our trade and investment relationship with China and level the playing field. The Tuesday announcement came just a day after the EU voted to restrict Chinese medical device manufacturers' access to the bloc's vast procurement market, a retaliatory measure responding to the restrictions EU firms face in bidding for contracts in China. This gives Europe a little bit of leverage in this round of negotiations, said Alicia Garcia Herrero, chief economist for Asia-Pacific at French investment bank Natixis. This is the first case under the new legislation, she added, referring to the EU's new international procurement instrument, which allows the bloc to take action against countries that restrict European firms' access to their procurement markets. There are many others that will come next. In a statement on Wednesday, Jens Eskelund, president of the European Chamber of Commerce in China, said a lack of fair access to government procurement in China has been a long-standing issue for European companies operating in the country. While we urge caution in the application of trade defense tools, the European Chamber supports the end goal of this action, which is to ensure that European companies have the same access to China's procurement market as Chinese companies enjoy in Europe, Eskelund said. The European side has a long list of grievances over its economic relations with China, with the latest being Beijing's rare earth export controls, which were announced in April as retaliation against U.S. tariff hikes, but are also disrupting the operations of European firms, Garcia Herrero said. Europe is starting to realize that China is using this as leverage to negotiate, she said. The situation is getting worse and worse. We need progress, we need deliverables, and we are not getting it. Jorge Toledo, EU ambassador to China. Jorge Toledo, the EU's ambassador to China, said last month that talks between the two sides aimed at resolving some of the thorny issues were not making progress. There is a lot of room for improvement. I'm afraid there is more and more room every day, because the situation is getting worse and worse. So we need progress, we need deliverables, and we are not getting it, Toledo said. For Beijing, a primary concern in its relations with Brussels remains the steep tariffs the EU imposed on Chinese electric vehicles last year, in response to which China has already announced a slew of retaliatory actions, including measures targeting European brandy and dairy products. Cui Hongjian, the head of EU studies at Beijing Foreign Studies University, said the Chinese side would like to find some common ground with the EU on EV tariffs ahead of the July summit. So the issue was likely to be a major topic of discussion in this month's talks. We are currently observing whether China will send out any major policy signals that could help foster a more optimistic outlook on the bilateral front, Cui said. The Chinese side does not fundamentally view issues like international procurement as insurmountable problems. But Cui said both China and the EU might lack the motivation and bandwidth to quickly resolve each other's grievances, with both sides still focused on their efforts to counter Trump's tariffs. At the political level, we see that China-EU interactions remain quite frequent, and the rhetoric is relatively positive, Cui said. However, when it comes to specific issues, obstacles seem to be emerging. A major obstacle to further progress is political inertia within EU institutions, Cui added, with many groups within the bloc insisting on pressing forward with a de-risking policy towards China.